Hello everyone, Stuckery here, and welcome back to the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. On today's episode, we're going to talk about an event that is both dumb and also simultaneously just terrible. This is the story of the Great Famine of North Korea that killed millions and these stupid things that went on to cause it. So for anyone that is not aware, North Korea suffered from a rather horrific famine in the mid to late 1990s. Now, the immediate cause of that famine was the widespread flooding that occurred in August of 1995 that destroyed much of the nation's rice crop. The summer monsoon rains that come each year were particularly heavy at that time. Starting on June 26th, it rained for 10 days, dumping as much as 23 inches on parts of the country. Satellite photos suggest that a quarter of the nation's rice paddies were just underwater. And I mean, obviously rice is a wet crop, but this was a little bit too much. Now, although North Korea's famine officially began as a natural disaster, the reality of the situation is that the beginning was far more political in nature, as is often the case with rather misguided states and policies. And oh boy, was North Korea misguided. But mind you, in the beginning, things weren't actually so bad for North Korea. The country's original transition to socialist agriculture had gone rather smoothly, actually, which is in sharp contrast with the collectivization of agriculture that you saw in many other communist regimes, such as that of the Soviet Union, Cuba, Vietnam, China, Cambodia, and Mongolia, all of which were marked by very severe food shortages and, in many cases, violence. It was really only after several decades of failed economic policy that you really started to see the cracks appear in the North Korean system, and things took a turn for the worse. Because when it did, then this was like a massive domino effect of stupidity. Because you see, North Koreans had been suffering from chronic food shortages for many years. The country, which is about the size of Pennsylvania and has a population of 22 million at the time of the famine, possessed rather limited farmland and a short growing season. Most of the good agricultural land was in the south. And with the 1945 division of the Korean Peninsula, the majority of the food supply was simply cut off. So to overcome this handicap, the regime spent large amounts of money, time, and effort on elaborate irrigation systems, and they made very heavy use of chemical fertilizers, as well as expanding the arable land by filling in the shallow seas along the coast and clearing forested mountainsides. The entire goal of this was for the regime to make the state of North Korea sustainable, independent. But while they were successful in creating some new farmland, this is something that came at great cost and also great upkeep, which is more cost for the future. The North Korean state treated agriculture like it was an industry, emphasizing mechanization, chemicalization, irrigation, anything they could do to advance it. Small plots of land were consolidated to create large fields that could then be worked with tractors. Tractors were locally manufactured and then put into use, although the supply was never actually enough, even when times were good. Huge amounts of chemical fertilizer would have to be applied in order to obtain high yields, and elaborate irrigation methods needed to be employed. But despite the intensity, North Korean food production was simply not able to keep up with its own population. And the government was not willing to import more food because that would have meant A, less money to spend on military equipment, and B, that it would have meant that they were no longer self-reliant. Not that they ever were in the first place, but this was a core ideological belief of North Korea. Which that is actually rather funny because they weren't actually self-reliant. Remember that whole mechanization, industrialization, and fertilizer and stuff from earlier? Yeah, the only reason that any of that was possible at all was because of Russia. Because you see, for years, the Soviet Union had supplied petroleum at an extremely subsidized rate called friendship prices in order to prop up its regional ally. But as the Soviet Union started to falter and Moscow demanded payment at market price for its oil in 1989, North Korean agriculture simply suffered. No longer would they be able to afford fuel for their pumps. Their irrigation systems would simply cease to operate. Tractors became idle, and fertilizer production fell because petroleum was used to manufacture it. The ending of cheap Soviet petroleum imports only added to the problems created by bad agricultural practices. Seeds were simply planted too close together, making the crops vulnerable to pests and exhausting the soil, something that was only warded off through the mass use of fertilizer. Without that, they were kind of screwed. Rigid regulations made it difficult for farms to adjust to any kind of local conditions that they could be facing, but the greatest problem was deforestation. Remember how a lot of those forests along the mountainside were cleared in order to make room for crops? Yeah, well, as it turns out, a large percentage of that wasn't actually able to be used for farmland, so the trees were simply just cut down. This over time would lead to severe soil erosion, but wait, it gets worse. In a measure to deal with the scarcity of meat, the state would encourage livestock raising, especially poultry and pigs. But the issue with these creatures is that they required feed, which they simply didn't have because of all the crop issues. So what the state tried was to launch a campaign to encourage raising goats. Although the issue here was that the country had grazing land, so the goats would go on to further contribute to soil erosion. What little land the cutting down of trees had not destroyed, the goats were going to finish the job. And so this deforestation and erosion would then contribute to the disastrous floods that were the immediate cause of the severe famine in the 1990s. With the soil now being so eroded, the moment that the rains hit, well, there was simply nothing to really hold back the water. Floods would ruin large swaths of North Korea, then leading to famine, which would kill millions. But the full story of that would probably take another video. If you'd like to hear it, please let me know down in the comment section below. But before that, I would ask that you like, comment, subscribe, do anything you can to support this channel. I appreciate all of you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.